RM Sotheby's is the world's largest collector car auction house by total sales. They are the preeminent market maker of high-quality collector cars and collections, regardless of size or complexity. By working in partnership with the Sotheby's team and its network of 80 offices in 40 countries, RM Sotheby's has established the largest client network of any collector car auction house in the world. Join the RM Sotheby's family by connecting with one of their car specialists at rmsotheby's.com or contact me directly at GStanley at rmsotheby's.com. LLC TLC is here to save you money on all of your vehicle purchases. LLC TLC will permanently register your classic cars in Montana to avoid any annual renewal fees. As your registered agent, they will handle everything for you so you never have to step foot in Montana. And as a listener of this podcast, LLC TLC is offering 30% off your entire package. Simply go to llctlc.com/classic or mention this podcast when you contact LLC TLC directly. Hey there, welcome to another edition of the Collector Car Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you will notice that my kitty cat is asleep, kind of stretching behind me. Hopefully she will stay asleep for the rest of this episode so I don't have to edit her out. But I just wanted to cover a bunch of cool stuff. Now this episode is called Functional to Fashionable. Now this is where I'm going to cover some cool car stuff, typically options, that were created with a purpose in mind. They served a purpose, but since then they have become more fashionable. The only use is to look good. So I'm going to go over quite a few of these. Before I do that, I would like to give you some updates. Now, the first update I would like to give is about the Cincinnati Concord, the Elegance, a couple weeks ago. That was the first time I've ever shown a car in my life, believe it or not. So I showed the 1966 Pontiac GTO. Obviously, you've heard a lot about that car. And it actually won 2 awards. One, it won the Award of Distinction. So at the Concord, they have Best in Class. It did not win Best in Class. It had the Pavilion Awards. There's 2 of those. So I would say Best in Class is number 1. Pavilion Awards are number 2 and number 3. And then Awards of Distinction, that would be spots 4, 5, and 6. So I did get an Award of Distinction for the Pontiac GTO. Thrilled to get that. But what I was really thrilled to get was a Preservation Award, the Jimmy Eibel Preservation Award, which was really cool. So I was able to do the parade and drive the car up to the award ceremony and played the Tiger Horn. That was a lot of fun. People got a big kick out of the Tiger Horn. A couple call outs. I've run into a couple listeners from the podcast, YouTube watchers. Call out to Mike at Cincinnati Concord. Actually, there were 2 Mikes that are frequent listeners to the podcast. I appreciate your support. And then Ed at Eyes on Design. We'll talk about that in a second. Ed met me at the gate, recognized my voice. We met 2 years ago at Amelia, so I appreciate that. If I ever do not remember your name, please forgive me. I'm horrible as is as a human being at remembering names, much more so since I seem to have to remember a lot of them nowadays, which is really, really great. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Eyes on Design. This was a great show up in Detroit. They had a symposium about the evolution of the Ford GT, how that car was built, taking the 1960s race car and turning it into the 2005-2006 supercar that we all love, as well as the one that came out later. So that is where I got the idea for this entire podcast. So what popped up in that symposium that made me think about this? Well, I'll tell you right now. Let's take a picture. Look here. So the Ford GT, the first gen from the 1960s, incredibly beautiful, brutal, meant to win races. And one of the things that came up about the Ford GT from a design perspective were the seats. Now the seats, very hot, cramped inside a race car, as you can imagine. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that there's these grommets that were installed into the seat cushions to allow for additional circulation and breathing so that the driver would not be totally stifled. And so that is what prompted this podcast episode, honestly. Also the start button. The old race cars had a start button. It was functional. It was meant to get, obviously quick ignition so that they could get and take off quickly. Well, when they were talking about designing the new Ford GT for the 2005, 2006, they talked about, well, how do we keep, what makes sense to keep in the car? And that's where the grommets transitioned from being functional to being fashionable. So I'm going to pop over here a couple more pictures, and you'll see that they mirror the grommet of those seats that were functional. Now they're fashionable. So they're in the new Ford GT. I don't think they're in the brand new one that came out in 2017, but the one from 2005, 2006, those are strictly there for fashionable reasons, as well as the start button. They talked quite a bit about what a challenge it was to get the start button put into the Ford GT. Now remember, this is back in 2005. Start buttons are commonplace now, but they said it was quite a battle to get that put in there. Now I could also mention the toggle switches. But those are functionals. Those were functional to begin with, and they're functional today on the Ford GT. So that's not a fashionable thing. You could say it is fashionable as well. You don't really need toggle switches in today's supercars. You could just do with your regular, touch buttons. But they kept that for a fashionable reason, but also functional. All right, I just wanted to talk about the start button since we're talking about the Ford GT. Let's see. The first car with a push button ignition was the 1912 Cadillac Model 30. Cadillac founder Henry Leland commissioned Charles Kettering from Dayton, Ohio, to create the electric starter in 1910 to improve early car safety and simplify engine starts. The button activated the electric starter, which replaced the engine crank. However, the push-button start was not very convenient because other steps were still required, such as setting the spark timing and fuel/air ratio. All right, if you're looking online here, you can see a little bit the start button just above the emergency brake on this 2005 Ford GT. Beautiful, beautiful car. All right, now while we're talking about Ford GTs, let's move on to another aspect of something that was functional, but now is strictly for fashion reasons. Now this would be the gumball. So gumball would be when you have a circle on your car meant for racing. Some of these cars, especially the newer Porsche Heritage Editions, actually have numbers in these gumballs. So it's the white circle on the side of the car. That was functional, obviously, because that's the racing number for the car. But now it has become fashionable. So it's in some of these Heritage Edition packages for the Porsche 911. You can get, again, in the Heritage Edition for those as well. I think you can even custom get the number you want in your gumball. Now, the other thing I'll mention is the Heritage Edition cars, such as the one I'm showing right now, 2006 Heritage Edition Ford Gulf Oil color cars. So this is just paying homage to the original Ford GTs that ran in Gulf Oil colors. If you're watching online, I will also mention, if you look at the headlights closely, this is a myth that they debunked. So if you look at a 2005, 2006 Ford GT directly, head on, looking at the headlights, the right headlight, which would be the driver's side, we're looking head on, so it's like stage right. If you look at the way the lights are set up, it looks like the number 100. And the question was, did Ford put that 100 in the headlight to commemorate their 100th birthday? Well, it turns out that was just accidental. This is from the designer of the Ford GT. He said that was just accidental. That is just the way the cars were designed. So it's a cool accident, basically, is what he said. All right, next, since we're talking about Heritage Edition cars that have stripes, why don't we talk about the origin of racing stripes? Now, this was very interesting because the story I always heard was that originally it was a single racing stripe that was put on a race car on the driver's side, so that if the car flipped and the ambulance was coming, the paramedics would know which side of the car to approach, because you would have left-hand drive cars as well as right-hand drive cars. I could not find any facts to support that, unfortunately. Now, I will say this is a podcast meant for entertainment purposes only. I often get the facts wrong, so take everything with a grain of salt. All right, the origin of racing stripes. If you're joining me on YouTube, you'll understand why I have the picture of this Cunningham showing right now. In the 1950s, FIA rules stipulated that race teams used colors which represented their countries. Italian teams painted their cars red, British green, Belgians yellow, French blue, German silver. American entries were painted white. If frame rails were exposed, they were painted blue. In some classes, especially Formula One, the cars tended to all look alike, especially at speed. The different colors, keyed to match each entrant's country, helped race fans tell them apart. Millionaire American sportsman Briggs Cunningham had a dream of winning the most prestigious sports car race in the world, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which just happened last weekend. In 1950, he entered a pair of Cadillacs. One was a stock two-door, with the only modification being a dual carburetor manifold. It was nicknamed Clumsy Puppy. The other was an aerodynamic bodied racer dubbed Le Monstre by the French. Now, I had a chance to see this car at Laguna Seca a few years ago. It definitely looked like a monster. The cars finished 10th and 11th. The following year, Cunningham entered a pair of sports cars of his own design and manufacture. He had purchased a small auto manufacturing business. The cars, appropriately called Cunninghams, were powered by Chrysler's new Hemi engine. They were painted in the American racing colors of white and blue. They failed to finish at Le Mans in 1951, but won major events at Elkhart Lake and Watkins Glen later that year. So basically, this was the very first use of racing stripes on a racing car. Now, what about a production car? Well, this is really interesting because I had no idea. You know, I'm a big Mustang Shelby fan. Well, the 1965 Shelby GT350 was the very first production car to have racing stripes from the factory. So I'm showing a 1965. This one was just on offer at the RM Sotheby's Dare to Dream collection. Beautiful, beautiful car. So all 1965 Shelby GT350s were white, and you had the option to have the racing stripes added or deleted, which is pretty interesting. Then 66, they expanded their color palette quite a bit. All right, now we're talking about cars with stripes. What about cars with hood scoops? Now, I had a hard time figuring out when the very first hood scoop appeared on a car. It was mentioned that it was related to the blower Bentleys of the 1920s and 30s. But I couldn't find that for sure, and the pictures I found did not show a hood scoop. So what I thought I would do is just use the same car and show you the differences in functional hood scoop versus a fashionable hood scoop. So the Mustang Mach 1 I'm showing here right now is a 1969 Mach 1 351 cubic inch engine. It is a fashionable hood scoop you see on top there. It says 351. It is a part of the hood. It's bolted on. There is no hole underneath in which to push air into the engine bay for cooling. It is strictly fashionable. Now, if you look at this picture I'm showing right now, if you look up at the top, you can't really see it in this picture, but there is no spot there for the air to come in. Now, ironically, on the 1969 Mustang Mach 1, you could get a functional hood scoop known as the shaker hood scoop. And that is what I'm showing you now with this beautiful Acapulco blue 1969 Mach 1 styled steel wheels. A beautiful car. You can see the hood scoop is much more pronounced. It's actually cut. There's a cut through on the hood where this actually stays attached to the air cleaner. So it actually draws air directly into the air cleaner to help with cooling and breathing. This is a beautiful example. Like I said, Acapulco blue with white interior. And here's a shot of the shaker hood scoop, called such that when you're at idle at a light, you can look out of your driver's seat and see the hood scoop shaking. Really, really cool. I would love to have one of these Mach 1s with a functional shaker hood scoop. Just a beautiful, beautiful car. All right, next, we're moving on to Porsche. Yes, we are talking about Porsches today. This is an interesting one because there's a lot of myths around why the Porsche ignition is on the left-hand side of the steering wheel. Now, when I did my deep dive a year or so ago about this, the traditional story is that as back in the day when you would race at Le Mans, the drivers would run to their cars and enter their cars. And the thought was as well, the driver would have the key in his hand, he'd open the door, and with it being on the left-hand side of the steering wheel, it was that much faster in which to get the car started to take off. But as I did more research, I don't think that was true. There was someone that worked at Porsche back in the 40s, 50s, I guess the early 50s, and he stated it was strictly based on the length of the copper wire to go. If you put it on the left, the copper wire was much shorter than if you put it on the right. So it was strictly from a financial fiduciary savings reasoning that they put it on the left and not on the right. So now today it is, as far as I know, it is just fashionable. It's keeping with that heritage of having the ignition switch on the left. We have a 2019 Porsche Macan, which is kind of interesting the way they did it. It feels like a key, it looks like a key, but really it's just a long knob that is permanently put there on the left, and you have to turn that to start the car. They changed it 2020, I believe, to a push button. I can't quite remember, but it looks like looks like a key, but you can't actually pull it out, which is pretty funny. All right, next we're moving to the, I might not say this right, Landal hinges. So thankfully, this is something that no longer occurs because it was pretty ugly. So these are the hinges on YouTube. I'm showing a picture of a 1928 Bentley Roadster, where you can see the Landal hinge on the back for the convertible top. All right, this is from MotorTrend.com. Once upon a time, when horses ruled the roads, one of the fanciest carriages money could buy was called the Landau. Named after the German city whose coach builders put them on the map, its claim to fame was the ability to keep occupants dry in the rain while also providing unfettered access to sunshine on more temperate travel days, accomplished by way of a folding fabric roof that covered the entire passenger area. When the first automobiles began vying with the equine competition for the affection of modern travelers, that means when cars were new and you also had people with a horse and carriage, most early body designs drew from the carriage playbook. This made sense for multiple reasons. Many early cars and trucks were built by companies that had made their fortunes first by serving the horse-drawn market, and so they merely transposed that styling ethos into the internal combustion era. So this was a functional thing, hinges, basically big hinges that look like a big S, about, I don't know, 1.5 feet long, that were on the convertible top of carriages. And so when they had to transition to automobiles, they kept that look, a functional look, but then it became a styling thing, a fashionable thing. And so when it was no longer needed, sometimes you would still see them on cars. It's a hard, not the best picture I'm pulling up right here, but it's I think it's a 1964 Thunderbird Coupe. And it has a fake Landau hinge on the back. Now, this isn't even a convertible. It has a vinyl roof, and it's just made to look like, oh, that top could possibly come down. So it was fashionable for a while. Thankfully, this trend died a number of years ago. I did want to read from another article I thought was pretty good. It's called thehogring.com. In the 1920s, U.S. automakers began producing fixed-roof cars with simulated convertible tops that featured side Landau bars to give them that elegant old-world look. The models were named Landals in honor of those bars. However, drivers at the time didn't see the sense in outfitting cars with simulated convertible tops, so the feature was discontinued and the name eventually died off. It wasn't until after World War II, when Americans returned from war in Europe where old-world styling was still popular, that tastes changed and U.S. automakers reintroduced Landau tops, some with Landau bars, other without. Today, Landau tops have again fallen by the wayside, but every now and then one will make its way into an upholstery shop for replacement. Once more, you can still find Landau bars on hearses where they become a design staple. All right, next we're going to talk about hood ornaments. Now, RM Sotheby's did quite a sale a number of years ago, so the pictures I'm showing online right now are from that sale. All right, today, very few automakers offer hood accessories, but for early motorists, they served as practical and decorative works of art. From 1905 to the early 1930s, motorists relied on motor meters, a thermometer device mounted onto the top of the radiator to monitor engine coolant temperature. Car manufacturers took the opportunity to market their brands and create mascots associated with certain makes and models. These mascots would accompany motor meters on the caps of car radiators until the car body designs changed, placing the radiator under the hood. Mascots remained a fashionable accessory on top of the hood, but auto designers added chrome-plated strips and called them hood ornaments for a more modern look. Today, the term car mascot and hood ornament are used interchangeably. I never use really car mascot ever. All right, designs reflected the style of the time period. In the 1910s through the early 1920s, mascot figures were realistically depicted. A lot of the ones I'm showing right now are from the 1920s, which are just amazing variety available back then. With a desire for a more modern look, mascots became highly stylized under the influence of the Art Deco movement. Designers commonly used themes of women or goddesses, mythological men and creatures, swift, graceful, or powerful animals in abstract, streamlined shapes like rockets. In the 1960s, hood ornaments started to be seen as safety hazards in collisions and were left out of designs in the efforts to streamline car body styles. As you look at the evolution of these car mascots and hood ornaments, consider how each one conveys the individual interests and passions of car owners. So a lot of really cool ones I'm showing here, everything from a squirrel to a cat to someone, a horse, a lot of animals, some women, a jockey on a horse, a bunny rabbit, all sorts of cool stuff here. An airplane. So yeah, so they started out as functional because that's how you could tell the temperature of your fluid in your radiator. But then they became fashionable. And really right now, the only one I can think of that's an actual hood ornament would be for Rolls-Royce. I know you have the flying bee on some Bentleys. I don't know if they still do that or not. So Rolls-Royce is the one that I can really think of today. And Jaguar, you can actually get that leaping Jaguar on the end of your Jaguar, at least up until a few years ago you could. Now, the Rolls-Royce has become so iconic, Spirit of Ecstasy, that it will actually go down into the safety of the grill so no one steals it, which is sad, but that's the way it is. All right, next, let's talk about Lowriders. Now, Lowriders, I thought this was one that was functional that turned to fashionable, but as I researched it, it might just all be fashionable. My understanding was from a functional perspective, back in the day, like in the 1940s and 50s, when the immigrant population would work in the fields, they actually lowered the cars or trucks to make it easier to actually work in the fields, but I could not find any reference of that. So this is from SmithsonianMag.com. The roots of lowriding in LA trace all the way back to the 1940s when car culture was beginning to take hold across America. This was especially true in Southern California, where families began purchasing cars in order to adapt to the expanding cities of the new post-war urban landscape. Like their white counterparts, Mexican-American veterans were also purchasing cars with the money they were earning from their service in World War II, as the hot rod trend swept the country, which comprised mainly of vintage models like Ford Model Ts, being modernized with enlarged engines for speed. Mexican-American vets, deftly employing the mechanical training they had received in the Army, began to tweak their cars in their own garages as a means of distinguishing themselves both on and off the road. Tinkering with the engines, painting the exteriors, and even adding weights in the back to lower the bodies, Mexican Americans were purposefully altering their cars. Chevys, which were in surplus at the time and designed with an X on the bottom that made them easy to modify, were especially popular, so that, unlike the hot and fast hot rods, their cars would be low and slow. So it was almost in response to the hot rodder trend, something different on the opposite end of the spectrum. All right, one more. I want to go a little bit in deep, and then I'll do a couple bullet points here, a couple notes. All right, this one I always thought was really cool. Japanese exhaust. So it's actually called Boso Zoku. Boso Zoku exhaust? All right. These are like where the exhausts go crazy. They make shapes. They go 8 feet into the air. I remember seeing this a few years ago, but if you're watching online, you'll see that basically in Japan, they exaggerate everything. The fenders to the skirts to the front air dam. And this is where functional, obviously, you had to have an exhaust. Well, now it's become fashionable in this example where it serves no purpose other than to look cool. So, all right. As you may have guessed, Boso Zoku style was born in the motherland, Japan. The term directly translates to running out of control tribe, otherwise known as violent running gang or tribe. Wow. Okay. Let's see here. Here's some more pictures. Known for riding around during the dark of night, revving their equally loud and gigantic bike and car exhausts and generally causing an upset, it comes as no real surprise that they weren't too popular with outsiders. As the style has evolved and achieved worldwide popularity, the gang-based past has become a distant memory, and many enthusiasts simply appreciate the unique tuning style which was born. With the style continuing to evolve, many owners prefer to use the Kusha Kai label rather than Boso Zoku which means classic car group, to steer away from the gang labeling assigned to the tuning culture. So they are just crazy, insane. If I had to come up with an example in the U.S., one of the popular things right now with BMWs and even some of the muscle cars I've seen is they'll take the exhaust and they'll exit it right out in front of the front wheel, out of the front fender. A little bit different, but same kind of idea. What can I do with the exhaust to kind of blow people's minds? It probably has a little bit of performance enhancement just because your exhaust pipe is so short, but definitely loud, and it definitely causes a ruckus. All right, the last few I'm just going to do more of a shout out. The Buick Century. This one is one that was fashionable, period. I'm talking about the portholes on the side. In the 50s, you could either have 3 or 4. They were non-functional. I think the idea was if you had 4, that was the fancy car. If you had the 4, if you had the 3, it was more the econo version. The other thing I'll mention are wraps. So wraps, I want to say, were, initially functional. You're advertising your window washing company or whatever. You're advertising that, and then it became fashionable in that you can now have these crazy wraps. Or that could be a protectant film to protect your car. Well, now it's fashionable. You can wrap your car in whatever color you want, or whatever. Make it kind of crazy. You could also take the something that was functional and now it's fashionable, spoilers and wheels. Obviously, you need wheels, but they definitely go much more the fashionable route now with so many different things out there in which to choose from. I think that's it. That's a lot. So, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Please share with your friends, and I will talk to all of you next week.